Okay, so today we're talking about how LLMs like ChatGPT think like. So if you've ever wondered how these LLMs think, they don't necessarily read minds or anything. And it doesn't understand English or words the same way that we do. Let's put it this way. Do you guys remember the scene in The Matrix where Neo's getting an explanation of how the code numbers in the Matrix work? And the explanation goes something like this. Each one of those numbers and symbols can be read by the person looking at it if you're skilled enough. And once you put all those numbers together, they form certain things. Like a bunch of numbers can form a building, and a bunch of numbers and symbols can form a car, and then a bunch of numbers and symbols can form something like an entire city or a park. That's kind of the exact same way that LLMs think. They take our language as it is, and then they break it down into tiny pieces and then into a format of numbers and symbols that they can understand before giving us a response. And once you understand how this works, you'll be able to understand how to use AI in your daily life much faster and smarter. So for those of you who are new, I'm Fabio, and I have spent the last 5 years in the AI engineering and business spaces. And today I will be explaining how LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude think in 3 simple steps. And most importantly, why this matters in the context of business, entrepreneurship, creation, and in just your day-to-day lives in general. So, let's get to it, shall we? Okay, so to describe the first part of this process, imagine you type in something like how to make a classic Italian-style pizza into something like ChatGPT. Once you hit enter, ChatGPT doesn't see the words the same way that we would. It will first chop it down into these tiny pieces called tokens. For example, Italian might be split into it, al, and then ian, and then all the other words will be split in a similar format. The easiest way to think about this is syllables, the syllables in words. Well, that is a simplified way to think about it because there are many components in a prompt like numbers and symbols. Syllables is very similar to the way an LLM like ChatGPT will break down words and symbols in a prompt so that it can better understand them. This process is called tokenization. And the cool thing is each one of these syllables gets a number. So in layman's terms, it's kind of exactly like the Matrix screens that were in the movie, which is pretty cool. So this means that LLMs like ChatGPT don't work with words, they work with numbers. And a cool fact, that's why sometimes the spelling in LLMs can be sometimes off with more rare words, because all it's really doing is predicting the next word. So that brings us to the next step of how LLMs think. So now that all these words and symbols have been broken down into tokens and each of those tokens gets a number, these numbers are then placed on a huge mathematical space. Think of it like a 3D grid where you get your z-axis, your y-axis, and your x-axis. And all the points are each and every single one of the tokens. Now the cool thing is each one of these tokens are connected with lines that show the relationship between each of them. It's kind of like how you have a map, a giant map with all the different cities and points that you can get to. And then you have all the different routes that you can take, all the different roads and transit systems that you can take. And how in some cities, they're way closer to each other and some are kilometers apart. But you have each and every single one of these roads and transit systems that show the relationship and how closely connected each of these cities are. In a sense, LLM AIs don't just match words, they match meanings to get the broader picture and relationship between words. So to illustrate, something like fast, quick, gym and protein, for a gym example, would be closely matched together in something like a 3D grid, as you can see here. So again, to summarize, the tokens are placed in a sort of mathematical grid. Similar words come close together and have these paths that connect them together, showing their relationship. And this process overall is something called embedding. This brings us to the last part of how LLM think. This I would consider would be the big breakthrough from the AIs of the past to the discovery of LLMs like ChatGPT, Claude, and DeepSeek that we now use today in the commercial space. So what they do is that instead of just looking at one word at a time now, after everything has been embedded and related, they look at the entire sentence as a whole and look at the words in terms of importance. They decide which words matter most. In a way, they're essentially looking at everything as a whole and using that to predict what's the most likely next word in the sequence of the sentence or prompt that you wrote down. It's kind of like how libraries have a database of all the different books in the library, right? So if you come in and you ask the librarian of a book about a certain period of history, say feudal Japan. So what they would do now is look for the book that is most relevant by first breaking it down into the genre, which is going to be history, then breaking it down into the subgenre, which is going to be Japan, and then the subgenre, feudal Japan, and then looking at all the books there and finding the one that is most relevant, which would, in the case of the AI, would be the next most likely word in the sequence. This entire process that's done by transformers is called attention. So if you're hungry and you want to make a steak and you type in something like, "I like my steak," an LLM would now predict the most likely next word based off all the previous context that you provided, and it would go through a bunch of words that it has in its database, like medium rare, medium well, house, like steak house, or sauces, like "I like my steak sauces," and then it will pick the most relevant next word in that sequence based off the previous context that you provided and the entire prompt as a whole. So why does this matter? In general, each of these processes is used to answer every single prompt in an LLM like ChatGPT. Tokenization can help do something like summarize long contracts or documents that you upload. Embeddings can power smart searches so that you can do something like find customer intent. And transformers is all about the output. So this lets the AI do something like draft copy for things like emails. For example, let's say I own a coffee shop in New York City and I ask an LLM like ChatGPT to write me an ad for my coffee shop in New York. It will undergo this entire process, breaking down my prompt into tokens, then embedding the relevance between all the words that I put in the prompt along with all the words that it has in its database, and then use the transformers to output a response based off the context of the prompt that I inputted and the context of everything that it has already outputted in general. And every single commercialized LLM model works because of these three steps. While there are other complexities to it, the foundation of it has always been these three steps. And at the end of the day, knowledge is always going to be power. And if you know how AI thinks, as time advances, you will become, in a sense, powerful, because now you will know how to use it and you will know how it thinks. So you'll be able to much better integrate it into every single process that you can think of. To summarize, I heard this really cool quote from someone. AI will never replace you, but the person who knows how to use AI will. And now that you know how AI thinks, you're ahead of pretty much 99% of people that still think, ChatGPT just is something from, well, the Matrix, and it's essentially magic or something like that. So until next time, I'm in your corner, and I'm rooting for you.